Israel has continued its airstrikes on several parts of the Gaza Strip, even as it continues issuing controversial evacuation orders to Palestinians. The Israeli military said its troops had found many tunnels used by Hamas at the Rafah crossing into Egypt. While the Israeli Defense Forces have declared a narrow coastal strip at Al-Mawasi to be a safe humanitarian zone, but the UN says it has no running water or proper sanitation. Israel says that since Monday, about 300,000 Palestinians have already fled Rafah. The US is still urging Israel not to mount a full-scale assault on the city. And in the north, there are evacuations in the city of Jabalia as the IDF says that it's been carrying out airstrikes. It says Hamas fighters are regrouping there. Meanwhile, a top EU official, Charles Michel, has condemned Israel's evacuation orders, saying that people are being directed towards unsafe areas. While the UK Foreign Office is investigating claims by Hamas that a British-Israeli hostage has died in Gaza. Nadav Popplewell was seized with his mother on October the 7th from the Narim kibbutz in southern Israel. Hamas claims that Mr. Popplewell died of wounds sustained in an Israeli airstrike more than a month ago. The Israeli military is yet to comment. The UK Foreign Secretary Lord Cameron was asked about the claim on Sunday with Laura Kuenssberg.
Like everyone else, I watched the video on Twitter, X, last night, put out by Hamas of Nadav answering a question as to who he was. And I watched that video, and you just think, what, callous people they are to do that, to play with the family's emotions in that way. I met Nadav's family, his sister, and I know the heartbreak they've been going through for over 200 days. And when you see what Hamas are prepared to do, you just realise the terrible, dreadful, inhuman people, frankly, that we are dealing with.
The UK Foreign Secretary. Well, our diplomatic correspondent Paul Adams is in Jerusalem.
These were claims that emerged yesterday when Hamas, as it has done repeatedly throughout this crisis, released a video in which they said that Nadav Popplewell, who's 51, was killed in an Israeli airstrike. Now, we have absolutely no way of verifying that. We don't know when the video that they released yesterday was shot. We need to be extremely careful about any assertions that Hamas is making about the circumstances surrounding his death, or indeed whether Nadav Popplewell is dead. But that is what Hamas said. We know that his brother was killed on October the 7th. They were both attacked on October the 7th. Their mother was also abducted, but she was released later in the first of the ceasefire hostage negotiations. The Foreign Office, as you say, is looking into this, but this kind of goes to the heart of one of the issues that still divides Israel and Hamas during these tortuous negotiations aimed at getting a ceasefire organized, which is how many Israeli hostages and dual national hostages are there? How many are still alive? How many are dead? Over the months, tragically, the number of dead hostages has risen, while the expectations for the number of live hostages has diminished somewhat. And this is a very live issue because the Israelis want much more clarity about what they can expect from Hamas in terms of the release of hostages, alive and dead, in return for a ceasefire deal.
Paul, we'll await any more comments from the UK Foreign Office as it investigates those Hamas claims about the British-Israeli hostage. Just in terms of the evacuations itself, of course, flyers are being dropped. Where are Palestinians being told to move to?
They're consistently being told to go northwest to the Al-Mawasi area, which is an area along the coast, an area that the Israelis identified right at the beginning of this campaign as a safe, secure humanitarian zone. And some of them are going further north to some of the middle areas of the Gaza Strip. Either way, they are going to places that are profoundly unsuitable for human habitation. There are no provisions for them when they get there. No one is setting up tent encampments for them. There is no water, no sanitation. getting food and other aid to them is increasingly difficult. We now estimate that, or at least following the Israeli announcement last night, that 300,000 people have heeded Israeli warnings to leave. That I would say something close to a quarter of the population that have been crammed into Rafah in recent months are now on the move. And that is just adding to the enormous pressure on those areas, Al-Mawasi and the middle part of the Gaza Strip, with parts of Rafah now becoming something of a ghost town. So many people went down from the northern part and then from Khan Yunis to Rafah over the months. Huge tent cities sprang up along the Rafah border with Egypt. Some of those tent encampments are now emptying fast, as people who have moved 3, 4, 5 times already feel that they're going to have to move again soon, and they're not waiting for the Israeli military to arrive. They're packing up and they're leaving because they've seen it all before.
So that was Paul Adams, and I want to pick up with some of the points that he made with our guest, Izabela Tsipirska, who's a humanitarian media specialist at ActionAid UK. And I know, Izabela, your organisation is supporting people in Rafah. Just talk us through what people who have been leaving Rafah have been telling your people on the ground there.
Well, thank you for having me. Yeah, I mean, right now in Rafah, there is just absolute fear and confusion and panic on the ground. Hundreds of thousands of people have already fled. These are people who've had to flee, carrying their belongings under a scorching hot sun, not knowing where they can go that is safe, that they can, start a new life for themselves. Remember, most of these people have had to flee multiple times. We're talking 5, 6, 7 times already. Our teams on the ground have spoken to some people who have arrived in Deir al-Balah, which is one of the so-called safe zones. They've described absolutely horrendous journeys, travelling by bus while bombardments took place all around them. They've talked about arriving in Deir al-Balah and having more scenes of chaos greeting them, basically, with none of the kind of essentials that they need. One man told us that he was trying to build a tent for himself and his disabled mother, and he was unable to source the materials he needed because they were so limited in supply and the prices had gone up so much. So I mean, really, the situation is just utterly dire right now, and there's just so much uncertainty.
So these areas that you describe, one, Deir al-Balah, of course, Al-Mawasi, Khan Yunis, they're being described as humanitarian zones, but in your opinion, they don't account for that?
Absolutely not. I mean, these are places that were already, before these latest evacuations began, were already completely overcrowded. Al-Mawasi, which is a tiny strip of land, which is mostly sand dunes, was already home to about 400,000 people. There just isn't the infrastructure to accommodate all these new arrivals. There's no one to meet them. There's no one to. There's nothing basically to give them. It's absolutely dire. Yeah.
Izabela, in terms of ActionAid, in terms of your organisation, how does it operate under these circumstances on the ground where there is so much need?
I mean, as always, we're doing everything we can, but there is just such difficult circumstances and things are changing day to day. I mean, we've had some of our colleagues and partners already had to flee Rafah. So even in the last few days, the situation has changed so quickly. But I mean, right now, the situation with getting and distributing aid is just incredibly difficult. I mean, in Rafah right now, Rafah, remember, is the main area through which aid arrives. 2 of the main aid crossings are located in Rafah. One of these, the Rafah crossing, is still closed. The other Kerem Shalom has opened, but aid is not able to be delivered through that crossing because of the kind of intensity of the fighting and because it's just so dangerous right now. So the humanitarian situation in Rafah, which was already, incredibly on a knife edge, is just deteriorating by the minute, really. I mean, the healthcare system has all but collapsed. One of the main hospitals in Rafah had to evacuate earlier this week. That leaves just 2 smaller hospitals and a few other medical facilities, which are, warning that they are running out of fuel. due to the sustained lack of aid, people in Rafah are, they're starving, they're hungry, they don't have enough water. 10% of children under the age of 2 are acutely malnourished. I mean, it really is an incredibly dire situation. And there's, aid organisations like ours are doing everything they can, but it's incredibly, incredibly difficult.
Izabela Tsipirska, thank you very much for just outlining the conditions of your team are operating there across Gaza. From ActionAid UK, thank you very much. Well, there is much more on this story, further coverage of the Israel-Gaza war on our website. Also, you can just go to the BBC News app as well, where we are continuing those reports as Israel intensifies its military operations in southern Gaza, and those tens of thousands more Palestinians are leaving Rafah.